Josie Callaway stepped off that stagecoach and the entire street stopped breathing. Not figuratively. Men froze mid-step. A horse lifted its head. Even the wind seemed to reconsider. She was the kind of beautiful that doesn't ask permission. Dark honey hair eyes that cut straight through a man before he'd finished forming a thought. A face that belonged nowhere near a mail-order form. Eli Tanner stared at her and felt his chest cave in like something structural had just failed. He had written plain and practical in ink. God had apparently found that hilarious. "You," he said, his voice completely gone, "are not what I ordered. If this story already has you hooked, go ahead and subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Drop a comment and tell us what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's get into it. Eli Tanner had filled out the agency form on a Tuesday evening in March alone at his kitchen table with a glass of water he never drank and a lamp that needed a new wick. He'd written plainly. He always wrote plainly. Seeking a woman of practical disposition. Must be capable of hard work and comfortable with rural isolation. Appearance is of no concern. Personality should be quiet and agreeable. He'd underlined quiet twice. Not because he was trying to be cruel, he wasn't a cruel man, but because he had lived in silence for 4 years, and he had learned painfully that silence was the only thing that didn't hurt. He sent the form. He waited. He worked his cattle, repaired his fences, ate his meals, standing at the counter because sitting down at a table alone felt like something a man did when he'd given up. He hadn't given up. He'd just made a decision. He would take a wife the way a man takes on a business partner with clear expectations, clean paperwork, and no emotional entanglement whatsoever. The agency wrote back in 6 weeks. "We have found a suitable match. Miss Josie Callaway, age 26 of Ohio, experienced in farm labor, literate of good health and character. Arrives Bitterroot Station, April 14th. April 14th came. Eli rode into town on his bay horse, tied up outside the station, and stood in the dust with his hat pulled low, watching the stagecoach roll in. He was not nervous. He told himself that firmly. He was not nervous. He was simply present. The door of the stagecoach swung open. A woman stepped out, and the first thing Eli registered before his brain could organize a single coherent thought was that the whole street seemed to go quiet. Not literally. The horses were still shuffling. A dog was still barking somewhere down by the livery. But something in the air shifted the way it does before a storm, that particular stillness that tells every living creature to pay attention. She was tall for a woman, and she moved like someone who had never once in her life waited for permission to enter a room. Her hair was the color of dark honey, loose at the edges from travel, and she had a face that was Eli's mind reached for the word plain and found nothing to attach it to. She was not plain. She was so far from plain that the word felt laughable. She was the kind of beautiful that men wrote bad poetry about, and women distrusted on sight, and God apparently thought was funny to send to a man who had specifically in writing requested the opposite. She looked around the station with calm, assessing eyes. Then those eyes found Eli. He said it before he could stop himself. "She is not what I ordered." Loud enough that men by the feed store turned. Loud enough that it carried. Josie Callaway looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she picked up her traveling bag, walked directly toward him, and stopped 2 feet away. Up close, she was worse. Worse in every way he hadn't wanted. "Eli Tanner," she said. "Yes, Josie Callaway." She extended her hand. "I heard what you just said." Eli looked at her hand. He shook it. It was a firm handshake, the handshake of someone who was not going to pretend she hadn't heard. "I apologize," he said. "That was an honest," she said, "which I respect, even if it wasn't kind." She tilted her head slightly, studying him the way a person studies a piece of farm equipment they're considering purchasing. "You're not what I pictured either." Eli blinked. "What did you picture? Older," she said simply, "and less angry looking." "I'm not angry." "You're holding your hat brim hard enough to crush it, Mr. Tanner." He looked down at his hand. She was right. He loosened his grip. "It's been a long morning," he said. "I've had a long 3 days," she replied. "Can we get moving? I'd like to see the place before dark." That was it. No tears, no wounded expression, no dramatic moment. She just picked up her bag and walked toward his horse, and Eli stood there for half a second longer than he should have before following her, because something in him, something he had buried under 4 years of silence and work, and deliberate iron-willed numbness, had just cracked just slightly, like the first hairline fracture in a wall before the whole thing comes down. He did not like that feeling at all. The ride back to the ranch took an hour and a half, and they spoke maybe 4 sentences the whole way. Josie sat in the wagon seat beside him and looked out at the valley without comment, which he appreciated. He was waiting for her to talk, to fill the silence the way most people did, nervously with words that meant nothing. She didn't. She watched the land and kept her own counsel, and Eli found himself against his will mildly curious about what she was thinking. He didn't ask. They pulled up to the ranch house, and Eli climbed down, tied the horse, and said, "It's not fancy." Josie climbed down herself before he could offer a hand, not rudely, just efficiently, the way a person does when they've been getting themselves in and out of things their whole life. She looked at the house. 2 stories, solid timber, well maintained. She looked at the barn, large, newer than the house. She looked at the pasture and the cattle moving in the distance. "It's a good ranch," she said. "It is," he agreed. "You built it yourself." "Most of it." She nodded once, like she was filing that away. "Where do I sleep?" He showed her the upstairs room at the end of the hall. He had put clean sheets on the bed. He'd done that much. She set her bag down, looked around, and said, "Thank you." No complaint about the small window, or the fact that the dresser had a wonky leg, or that it was clearly a room that had been used for storage until very recently, given the faint rectangular shadow on the floor where a crate had sat. "Supper's at 6, Eli said from the doorway. "I cook my own. You're welcome to eat with me, or I can leave something out." Josie turned and looked at him with that same calm, reading him expression. "We're married, Mr. Tanner, or close enough to it once we see the preacher. We can eat together." "Right," he said. 6 then." He left before the conversation could become anything more than what it was. Downstairs at the kitchen counter, Eli stood with his hands flat on the wood and stared at the wall for a long moment. He was a man who had always understood himself. He knew his own nature, steady, private, controlled. He had built his entire life around those qualities. And now there was a woman upstairs in his house who had shaken that understanding in approximately 90 minutes without raising her voice, without demanding anything, without even trying. That was the part that frightened him. If she had been difficult, he could have managed it. If she had been weepy, or demanding, or immediately resentful of the arrangement, he would have known what to do. He'd prepared himself for that. He had not prepared himself for calm, for competence, for a woman who shook his hand firmly and told him he was angry-looking, and then got on with the business of arriving. He started making supper and tried to stop thinking about her. He failed. She came downstairs at 5:45. She'd changed out of her traveling clothes into a simple work dress, dark blue, and her hair was pulled back now. She took one look at what he was doing at the stove and said, "You're going to burn that." "I'm not going to burn it. The heat's too high for salt pork. It'll go tough." He looked at the pan. He looked at her. "I've been cooking my own supper for 4 years, and eating tough salt pork for 4 years, probably." She said it without malice. She moved beside him, reached across, and turned the heat down. Her arm brushed his for half a second. Neither of them acknowledged it. "Do you have onions?" "In the bin." She found them, started cutting. She moved in his kitchen with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime feeding people, not fumbling around in unfamiliar spaces. Eli stepped back slightly because there wasn't much room, and she clearly knew what she was doing, and he did not entirely trust himself to stand that close. "You don't have to cook," he said. "That wasn't part of what I know it wasn't part of your arrangement," she said. "But I like to cook, and I'm hungry, and your supper was going to be terrible." She glanced up. "That's not a criticism. That's just a fact." "You say a lot of things that are just facts," Eli said. "Is that a problem?" He thought about it. "No," he said honestly. Actually, no, it's not. She looked at him for a moment, something shifting in her expression, not quite softening, but becoming less guarded maybe. Good, she said, because I'm not much for tiptoeing. They ate at the table. Eli sat down. He couldn't remember the last time he'd sat down for a meal. The food was better than anything he'd made in 4 years. He wasn't going to say that, but it was true. She ate without ceremony and asked him 3 questions: how many head of cattle, whether the east fence ran all the way to the creek, and what his arrangement was with the neighboring ranches. Business questions, ranch questions. He answered all 3 in full. She asked no personal questions. He asked none of hers. After supper, she washed the dishes. He offered to help. She told him to go rest. He was so startled by the instruction that he actually did it. He didn't sleep well. He lay in his room and stared at the ceiling and listened to the silence, which felt different now, not the familiar owned silence of a man alone in his house, but the charged alert silence of a man who is aware for the first time in a long time that he is not alone. In the morning she was already up. He came downstairs to find her in his barn, not lost, not poking around out of curiosity. Working. She was forking hay with the focused efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times, talking quietly to the horses in a low, even tone. Eli stood in the barn doorway and watched for a moment he shouldn't have. "You ride," he said finally. She didn't stop what she was doing. "Since I was 7. The gray mare's steady. You can take her if you need." "Thank you." He stepped in, picked up the other fork, started working the stall beside her. They fell into a rhythm, not planned, not discussed, just the natural rhythm of 2 people who are both competent at the same task, working in close quarters. It wasn't comfortable. It was something stranger than comfortable. It was workable, like a joint that fits without quite clicking. After a while she said, "The east fence does run to the creek. I checked this morning." Eli looked up. "You went out to check?" "I was up early, couldn't sleep." She paused. "There's a section about half a mile north of the water that's going to go. 3 posts are bad." "I know," he said. "I've been meaning to get to it." "I can help you fix it." "You don't need Mr. Tanner." She stopped working and turned to face him directly. "I know what this arrangement is. I know what you asked for. I know I am not that, and I am not going to pretend otherwise." She held his gaze. "But I'm here. I intend to be useful. I intend to earn my place on this ranch. Not because you're demanding it, because I do not know how to live any other way." A beat. "So either tell me you don't want my help with the fence and I'll find something else to do, or stop arguing and let me help." The barn was quiet except for the horses shifting. Eli said, "Fence posts are in the back of the barn." Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, close to one. "Good," she said, and went back to work. They spent that morning on the fence. Josie drove posts with a confidence that silenced the part of Eli's brain that had expected her to struggle, and he found himself restructuring his initial understanding of her, not just as something he hadn't expected, but as something that demanded a different category entirely. She wasn't performing capability. She simply had it built in without ornamentation. "Where'd you learn ranching?" he asked around mid-morning. "My father's farm in Ohio. He had 4 daughters and no sons and wasn't interested in waiting around for a man to show up and do things. We all worked." She was setting the post, bracing it. "He used to say a woman who can fix a fence will never be at anyone's mercy." "Sounds like a sensible man." "He was. He died 2 years ago. After that," she paused very briefly. "After that, staying in Ohio didn't make much sense anymore." Eli didn't push. He knew what that kind of after that sounded like. He had his own. "The agency said you wanted someone plain," Josie said. Not accusatory, conversational, like she was simply pointing out a fact on the invoice. Eli straightened. He thought about not answering. He answered, "Yes." "Why?" The question hung there. Eli drove a post anchor into the ground and said without looking at her, "Because pretty women make men do stupid things, and I'm not in the business of being stupid anymore." She was quiet for a moment. That's a strange thing to say. It's an honest thing to say. It's also a little insulting, she said to both of us. To me because you're suggesting my face makes me less manageable. And to you because you're suggesting you have no control over your own reactions. Eli looked at her. She looked back at him steady. I didn't say I had no control, he said. Then what's the problem? He had no answer for that. He picked up the wire reel and moved to the next section, and she followed, and they kept working, and he was uncomfortably aware that she had just won an argument without raising her voice. That evening, the town's minister, Reverend Cole, came out to perform the simple ceremony Eli had arranged. It lasted 12 minutes. Josie said her vows clearly, without hesitation, in a voice that carried. Eli said his the same way, quietly, precisely, meaning every practical word while keeping himself carefully away from what the words implied. After the Reverend left, Josie stood in the doorway and looked out at the darkening sky. Eli stood a few feet behind her. Well, she said, we're married. Yes. That's either the best or worst decision either of us has made in some time. Probably, Eli said. It's too early to know. She glanced back at him over her shoulder. Fair enough. Then she went inside and he heard her in the kitchen heating water for tea, moving through his house with a quiet confidence that was already becoming terrifyingly familiar. 3 days in the trouble began. Not from Josie, from the town. Eli rode in for supplies and found the social temperature of Bitterroot had opinions. Helen Marsh, the postmaster's wife, stopped him outside the general store with the particular expression of a woman who considers herself the community's moral authority. I heard your mail-order bride arrived, she said. She did. And she's... Helen paused, choosing words with the delicacy of someone handling explosives. Not quite what people expected. What did people expect? Well, Helen pressed her lips together. The agency usually sends, more ordinary women. Women who've had trouble finding prospects through the normal channels. Not... Another pause. She's very beautiful, Eli. I noticed. Some of the women in town are saying it seems suspicious. A woman that beautiful coming out here willingly to a man she's never met. She leaned in slightly. There are questions. Eli looked at her for a long moment. Helen, he said, is there something specific you're trying to say? Helen pulled back. I'm just telling you what people are talking about. People can talk about whatever they like, Eli said. What they can't do is say it to her face and call it concern. She's my wife. That's the end of it. He bought his supplies and rode home. But the ride back, something sat uneasy in him that had nothing to do with Helen Marsh's gossip. Because the question she'd hinted at, why would a woman like that choose this, was the same question circling in the back of his own mind, the one he hadn't let himself look at directly. Not yet. He was starting to think he was going to have to. That night he found Josie at the kitchen table with his ranch ledger open. He stopped in the doorway. What are you doing? She didn't look up. Going over your books. I didn't ask you to do that. I know. She turned a page. You've got a cash flow problem developing, not critical yet. But your hay costs are going to hit hard in winter if you don't adjust the pasture rotation in the east field. Eli walked slowly to the table and sat down across from her. Where did you learn to read a ranch ledger? My father kept records for everything. He taught me. She finally looked up. Are you angry? No, he said. He stopped. She waited. I'm not used to this, he said finally. To someone helping. To someone just... He searched for the word. Taking hold, without being asked, without making it a production. Josie set down her pencil. She folded her hands on the table and looked at him with those steady reading eyes. Eli, she said, and it was the first time she'd used his first name just like that, easy and direct. I didn't come out here to sit in a room and look decorative. I came because I needed a life I could build something in. This, she gestured at the ledger, the house, the general. Everything Is that life? I'm not going to half do it. A pause. Unless that's not what you want. Eli's hands were on the table. He looked at them. Then he looked at her. East pasture rotation, he said. Show me what you're thinking. She pulled the ledger toward him and leaned over slightly to point at the columns, and he leaned in too, and they stayed like that for an hour. Heads bent over the numbers, talking through the land, like two people who were slowly, haltingly, inexplicably, beginning to build something that neither of them had originally intended and neither of them yet was willing to name. Outside the valley held its breath. Inside, very quietly, something had started that was not going to stop. The ledger was still open on the table when Eli woke the next morning. His own handwriting mixed now with Josie's neat, careful annotations in the margins. Numbers recalculated a rotation schedule sketched out in pencil along the side column. He stood over it for a moment before he poured his coffee, reading what she'd written. And the thing that unsettled him wasn't that she'd been right about the pasture figures. It was that she'd seen the problem faster than he had. His own ranch, his own land. And she'd walked in on day 3 and seen straight to the center of it without breaking a sweat. He drank his coffee standing up the way he always did. Except this morning, the kitchen didn't feel the same as it always did. It felt occupied, used, alive in a way it hadn't been in 4 years, and he didn't know what to do with that, so he put on his coat and went to work. Josie was already in the barn. He was going to have to stop being surprised by that. Sleep well, she asked, without looking up from where she was checking the gray mare's left foreleg, running her hand down the cannon bone with the practiced focus of someone who actually knew what she was feeling for. Fine, he said. You, not particularly. She straightened. She's got some heat in this leg, not bad, but worth watching. Eli came and looked. She was right. A mild warmth, nothing alarming, but worth monitoring. I'll keep her in today, he said. Already planned on it. She picked up her work gloves from the stall rail. I was thinking about riding the north pasture line this morning. On foot since the mare's staying. Unless you need me for something else. On foot? I've walked longer distances for less reason. She looked at him calmly. Do you need me for something else? No, he said. But I'll come with you. Something crossed her face, not quite surprise, but close to it. She recovered quickly. All right, she said. Give me 10 minutes. They set out together just after sunrise, and the walk was long and quiet in the way that suited them both, not the strained silence of two strangers pretending to be comfortable, but the working silence of two people focused on the same task. Eli pointed out the property markers as they moved along the fence line. Josie asked sharp, specific questions about the soil, the drainage, the way the cattle moved through the lower section in wet weather. She wasn't making conversation. She was learning the land. And Eli found himself answering not just the questions she asked, but the ones underneath explaining things he hadn't explained to another person in years, because there had been no one to explain them to. About 40 minutes out, they reached the section she'd mentioned. 3 fence posts were indeed failing too, listing one cracked clean through at the base. Josie crouched down, examined the base of the cracked post, and said, Rot started from the bottom. This was sitting in water for too long, probably 2 seasons back. The creek shifted, Eli said. After the spring flood 2 years ago. Changed the drainage through this section. And you didn't relay the posts. I meant to. He said it bluntly. Ran out of time. Josie stood. She looked at him, not accusatory, just honest. You've been running this place alone for how long? 4 years. And before that? A pause. Eli looked at the broken post. There was supposed to be 2 of us. It didn't work out that way. Josie was quiet for a moment. She didn't push. Instead, she said, We'll need 6 posts to do this properly, and new wire for about 30 feet. I'll haul it out tomorrow. I'll help. You don't, Eli. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through cleanly. Stop finishing that sentence. He looked at her. She held his gaze, not aggressive, not pleading, just direct, the way a person is direct, when they have decided something and are done revisiting it. He nodded once. She turned and they walked back, and that was that. But something had shifted. Something small and structural, like a stone moving at the base of a wall, barely visible, barely anything at all. Except stones like that, once they move, have a way of changing everything above them. So, the shift showed up in small ways first. The way Josie had started leaving his coffee at the right temperature without being asked because she'd noticed the timing of when he came in from the morning chores. The way Eli had started leaving the barn lantern on a hook she could reach without stretching because he'd noticed she had to stand on the stall rail to get it otherwise. Neither of them mentioned these adjustments. Neither of them acknowledged them. But they accumulated these small, silent acts of attention, and they had a weight. On the 6th day, Roy Decker showed up. Eli heard the horse first. He came out of the barn to find Roy Decker sitting in his saddle at the front gate with the easy proprietary posture of a man who has never once questioned whether he was welcome somewhere. Roy owned the ranch that bordered Eli's land to the north. More land, more cattle, more money, and a way of reminding everyone of all three without ever saying it directly. He was 38, broad-shouldered, and had a smile that worked on most people because most people didn't look at what was behind it. "Tanner," Roy said pleasantly. "Heard you took yourself a wife." "Word travels," Eli said. "In a valley this small it does." Roy glanced toward the house. "Is she around?" "She's busy." Roy smiled wider. "Heard she's something to look at." "What can I do for you, Roy?" Roy shifted in his saddle. "Actually came to talk about that strip of creek land on the south boundary, the one we've been going back and forth on. Wanted to see if you'd reconsidered." "I haven't." Roy had been trying to purchase a narrow strip of land along the shared creek boundary for 2 years. Eli's refusal had always been simple: it wasn't for sale. Roy's interest in it had never quite made sense proportional to its size, which was the main reason Eli had never sold. When a man wants something that badly and can't give you a clean reason why you hold on to what he wants. "I'm prepared to offer a good price," Roy said. "Better than last time." "Still not for sale." Roy nodded slowly, still smiling. And then the front door opened and Josie stepped out. Roy Decker looked at her and his smile changed. It didn't disappear. It became something more calculated, something that Eli noticed immediately and did not like. "Mrs. Tanner," Roy said, and there was an ease in the way he said it, too easy, the ease of a man who has decided something about a woman without her permission. "A pleasure. Roy Decker, I'm your neighbor to the north." Josie came and stood beside Eli. Not behind him. Beside him. "Mr. Decker," she said evenly, "we were just finishing up a conversation, I think." Roy raised his eyebrows, amused. "Were we—" "My husband said the land isn't for sale," Josie said. "Was there something else?" A beat. Roy looked between them. His smile held, but it was working harder now. "Sharp woman," he said to Eli, as if Josie weren't standing right there. "She's also standing right here," Josie said. Roy laughed, genuine, this time brief. "Fair point." He gathered his reins. "I'll be back in the neighborhood. Might stop by again if you don't mind." "Eli will be here," Josie said. Roy tipped his hat and rode out, and Eli watched him go until he cleared the gate. Then he turned and looked at Josie. She was watching the road, her arms crossed, her jaw set. "You know him," Eli said. "Never met him before in my life." She glanced up. "But I know that kind of man. He's used to getting what he asks for." A pause. "You should find out why he actually wants that land." "I've been wondering that for 2 years." "Wonder faster," she said, and went back inside. Eli stood at the gate for a long moment after she left, looking at the road where Roy Decker had been. And then he looked at the house. And something settled in him, not warm, not soft. Something harder than that. Something defensive and certain, the way a man feels when he suddenly understands what he's protecting and why. That evening there was a knock at the door. Eli opened it to find Tom Griggs, who ran the livery stable in town, standing on the porch with his hat in his hands and the expression of a man carrying a message he'd rather not be carrying. "Eli," Tom said. "I'm sorry to come out this late. You got a minute?" "What is it?" Tom glanced past Eli into the house, then back. "Helen Marsh has been talking. You know how she gets." He cleared his throat. "She's been telling people that your wife, that she's well, that she was sent out here under false pretenses, that she lied to the agency about her situation." Eli went very still. "What situation?" Tom's face was pained. "She's saying the girl was involved with someone back in Ohio, that she left under—" He stopped, started again. "Helen's saying she's not what she claims." "Helen Marsh doesn't know one thing about my wife," Eli said. His voice was level, controlled, but his hand on the door had tightened. "I know that. I'm just telling you what's going around. Figured you'd want to hear it from someone who isn't enjoying saying it." Tom put his hat back on. "Watch yourself, Eli. Roy Decker's been having coffee with the Marsh family 3 mornings this week." He left. Eli closed the door. He stood in the entry for a moment. Then he walked to the kitchen where Josie was at the table with a cup of tea reading. She looked up. She read his face immediately. "What happened?" Eli sat down across from her. He put his hands flat on the table. "There's talk in town," he said. "Helen Marsh is saying you misrepresented yourself to the agency, that you left Ohio under complicated circumstances." Josie's face didn't change. That was the thing, it didn't crumble, didn't go hot with denial, didn't do any of the things a guilty person's face does when they're caught, or an innocent person's does when they're ambushed. It just stilled, like water before a stone hits it. "What kind of complicated circumstances?" she said. She didn't specify. Josie set down her cup. She looked at her hands on the table. For a long moment she said nothing. Eli waited. He was good at waiting. "There was a man in Ohio," she said finally. Not confessionally, factually, like she was stating weather. "His name was Franklin Holt. He was my employer. I worked in his household for 2 years after my father died. He told me he intended to marry me. He was very—" She paused. "Convincing." Another pause. "He was already married. I found out when his wife came home from visiting her family in Cincinnati. She'd been gone 4 months. Josie looked up. "I left the next day. I went to the agency 2 weeks later." The kitchen was very quiet. Eli looked at her. He looked at the way she was holding herself straight, not defensive, not ashamed. Just honest in the way of someone who has decided that shame is a weight they're not willing to carry for someone else's dishonesty. "Did the agency know?" he asked. "I told them everything. They said it wasn't a disqualification." Her eyes were steady on his. "I was not involved with a married man knowingly, Eli. The moment I knew I left. That's all there is." Eli nodded slowly. "Do you believe me?" she asked. Not desperately, calmly. But the question was real, it had weight. He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about the way she'd shaken his hand on Main Street, the way she'd checked the mare's leg before anyone asked, the way she'd stood beside him when Decker came calling, not beside, the way she ran her pencil down his ledger columns like she was already invested in the answer. "Yes," he said. "I believe you." Something in Josie's face moved so briefly, he almost missed it. Something that had been braced carefully for a different answer. It passed in a second. She picked up her tea. "Roy Decker has been having breakfast with Helen Marsh's family," Eli said. 3 mornings this week." Josie's hand stilled on the cup. She set it down again. She looked at him. "He's using her to run the story," she said. "That's what I think." "Why to discredit me, or to pressure you? Both, probably." Eli leaned back. "If the town decides you're unreliable, it gets harder for me to refuse him anything without looking like a man whose judgment is also questionable. He discredits you, he discredits me." Josie stared at the table for a moment. Then she said very quietly, "He wants this ranch." Part of it. No. She looked up. All of it, I think. The creek boundary is a start. She pressed her lips together. A man like that doesn't want a strip of land for its own sake. He wants control of the water. If he controls the water access from that boundary, he can dictate your grazing rotation. He makes your operation dependent on his goodwill. She paused. And eventually, you sell. Eli looked at her. That's what it is, she said. Isn't it? I suspected, he said. I didn't have it as clearly as that. Because you've been running this ranch alone for 4 years, she said. You've been too close to it to see the shape of it from outside. She wasn't saying it to wound him. She was saying it the way you say a true thing to someone you're trying to help. He's been patient. He's been building this for a while. What do I do about it? You file a formal property survey and get the creek boundary legally documented, she said. Before he can make any counterclaims, you do it through the county office, not the local justice. Roy Decker has friends in Bitterroot. She tapped the table once. And you do it this week. Eli was quiet for a moment. My father's farm, she said, reading his unspoken question. We had a neighbor like Roy Decker. We lost 20 acres before we understood what was happening. Eli stood up. He looked at her sitting at his kitchen table in his kitchen, in the house he'd built on the land he'd spent 4 years protecting alone. And the thing that moved through him then was so unfamiliar, he almost didn't recognize it. It wasn't gratitude, though it was close. It wasn't admiration, though it had that quality. It was something more foundational than either. It was the specific, particular relief of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has just without asking for it, been offered a hand. He didn't say any of this. He said, I'll ride to the county seat Thursday. She nodded. Take the documentation from the original deed. All of it. I know what to take, he said. But he said it without edge. She almost smiled. I know you do. He went to bed and did not stare at the ceiling the way he had the first nights. He stared at it differently. Not restless, not unsettled, but thinking. Thinking in the particular way of a man who has just understood that the walls he built so carefully around himself have not actually been keeping anything out. They've been keeping him in. And the door, it seemed, had been open this whole time. So, the next morning he saddled his horse before breakfast. Josie came out of the house with a cup of coffee just as he was checking the cinch. She held it out to him without a word. He took it. Their hands didn't touch. But the gesture was the kind that sits in a person's chest long after the coffee's gone. Be careful in town, she said. I always am. Roy Decker will hear you're going to the county seat, she said. He has people watching. Let him hear. Eli drained the coffee, handed back the cup. Let him try to get ahead of a legal filing. That'll tell us plenty about what he thinks he's entitled to. She held the cup and looked at him. You're not afraid of him. I'm not afraid of much, Eli said. He put his boot in the stirrup. But I've been underestimating the situation. He looked down at her from the saddle. I won't do that again. Josie looked back up at him. The morning light was in her face. She didn't look beautiful the way people mean when they mean soft and decorative. She looked like something that had been forged, shaped by real things, real losses, real choices. And for the first time, Eli Tanner didn't look away from that. Go file your survey, she said. He turned his horse and rode, and behind him, Josie Callaway. Josie Tanner stood in front of the house. They were both slowly and without ceremony beginning to think of as theirs. She watched him ride until the road curved and took him out of sight. Then she went back inside, sat down at the ledger, and kept working. Because that was who she was. And somewhere in a part of himself he'd spent 4 years trying to wall off. Eli Tanner already knew it. The county clerk's name was Arthur Peel, and he was a precise man who wore the same brown vest every day and kept his office in an order that bordered on devotional. Eli had dealt with him twice before, once when he registered the original deed, once when a boundary line needed a correction after a surveyor's error 3 years back. Peel remembered everything. That was both his value and his limitation. Mr. Tanner, Peel said when Eli came through the door, it's been a while. It has. I need to file for a formal property survey on the South Creek boundary. Full documentation, county record. Peel set down his pen. He looked at Eli with the careful neutrality of a man who has heard a great deal about other people's business and keeps it behind his eyes. That boundary was surveyed on original filing. I want it resurveyed and re-recorded, formally, with a county witness. Eli set the deed documents on the desk. How soon can that be done? Peel looked at the documents. Then he looked at Eli. There been a dispute. Not yet, Eli said. I'd like to keep it that way. Something moved behind Peel's neutral expression. Recognition, maybe. Or understanding. He picked up the documents and began reviewing them without further comment, which was his version of saying, I know exactly what this is about, and I'm going to help you. The filing took 2 hours. The survey appointment was set for the following Monday, the earliest available. Eli paid the fee, signed the request, and was back on his horse before noon. He was 2 miles outside town when he saw Roy Decker's foreman, a thick-necked man named Gus Platt, watching him from the far side of the main road with no particular reason to be standing there. Gus didn't wave. Eli didn't wave. They looked at each other the way men look at each other when both of them understand that something has just been set in motion. Eli rode home faster than he'd ridden out. Josie had company when he arrived. He heard the voice before he reached the porch. A woman's voice, high and carrying, with the particular cadence of someone who has rehearsed what she's saying. He came through the front door to find Josie standing in the center of the front room, with her arms crossed and her face composed into a polite, impenetrable expression, and Helen Marsh sitting in the chair by the window with a basket of something on her lap and the posture of a woman conducting an inspection. Helen looked at Eli with visible relief. Eli, good. I was just visiting with your wife. I see that, Eli said. He looked at Josie. Josie's eyes moved to his very briefly, very specifically, and communicated about 4 things without a word. I brought preserves, Helen said, gesturing to the basket. A welcome gift. Better late than never. That's kind, Eli said. I was telling Josie about the ladies' social on Friday. Helen continued in the tone of a woman who was telling something quite different from what she was saying. We do hope she'll come. It's important for a new wife to get to know the women of the community. Build those connections. A small pause. People have so many questions about her. Do they? Eli said. Naturally, she's new. And Helen's eyes went to Josie and then away the way eyes do when they're making a judgment they don't want to be caught making. Well, she's not quite what anyone expected. From a mail-order arrangement. You said that, Josie said pleasantly. Twice. Helen blinked. I only meant. You meant that a woman who looks the way I do must have had some particular reason for ending up here. Josie's voice was perfectly even, not sharp, not aggressive, like she was describing the weather. And you're hoping I'll say something that confirms whatever you've already decided. She tilted her head slightly. Am I close? Helen's mouth opened, closed. I'll come to the ladies' social, Josie said. Thank you for the preserves. I'll show you out. It wasn't a question. Helen stood, and the basket was somewhat tangled in her movement, and Josie held the front door open with quiet, absolute finality. Helen left with the expression of a woman who came to deliver a message and received one instead. Eli waited until the sound of Helen's horse had faded down the road. Then he looked at Josie. You handled that, he said. She came to look me over, Josie said, uncrossing her arms, and to see if I'd act guilty. I don't have anything to be guilty about. She walked to the kitchen. The survey filing, how did it go? Monday, county witness. Eli followed. Decker's foreman saw me leaving. He'll know by tonight. Josie was already at the counter and she stopped moving for just a moment. Then she said, How long before Decker does something about it? That's the question. She turned. He won't come at you directly. Not yet. He'll try something indirect. First try to make the survey complicated, or get someone to dispute the original placement of the boundary markers. She looked at Eli. Is there anyone who set those original markers who might be persuadable? Eli thought about that. The original surveyor passed on 2 years ago. His assistant. He stopped. What? His assistant works for the county office now, Eli said slowly. Arthur Peel's office. They looked at each other. Roy has breakfast with the Marsh family, Josie said. Does he have any connections to the county clerk's office? I don't know, Eli said. I didn't think to look. Josie nodded, thinking. We need someone in that office we trust. Is there anyone? Peel himself. He's an honest man. Then make sure Peel personally oversees the survey request. Don't let it get passed down. She paused. Can you get back to the county seat tomorrow? If I leave early. Leave early, she said. And then she turned back to the counter and started on supper, and Eli stood in his kitchen, watching her move through a problem the way a good rancher works a difficult piece of land methodically without panic, reading the ground as she went. He had the abrupt and uncomfortable thought that if she had walked into his life under different circumstances, if she had been something he'd chosen rather than ordered from a form, he would have been terrified of her. Not of who she was, of how much he would have wanted her from the start, and how that wanting would have undone every careful, controlled thing he'd built in himself. He went to put the horses up and told himself firmly to think about something else. He didn't succeed. Chapter. He rode back to the county seat the next morning before dawn and got to Peel's office when the man was still unlocking the door. Mr. Tanner, Peel said, with the tone of a man who has been expecting this. Come in. Eli came in. He said without preamble, I need you to personally handle the survey oversight. Don't delegate it. Peel looked at him for a long moment. You think someone might interfere with the request? I think it's possible. Peel sat down at his desk. He folded his hands. Roy Decker, he said the way you say a name when you know what it means. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Peel looked at the file he'd started the day before. Eli, I've been county clerk for 11 years. I know who in this valley has been trying to consolidate water access for the last 3 years. He opened the file. I will personally witness the survey. I'll also note in the record that the request was filed in response to a potential boundary dispute, which gives you legal protection if anyone tries to file a competing claim during the survey window. Eli exhaled. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just make sure your original stakes are still physically in the ground when the surveyor gets there Monday. Peel looked up. Sometimes stakes go missing over a weekend. Eli felt something cold run through him. I'll check them. He rode back at a pace that had the horse working hard and was home by midday. Josie was in the north pasture when he arrived on foot, walking the fence line with a notebook she'd found one of his old stock ledgers and started using the blank pages in the back. He saw her from 50 yards away, and something about the sight of her moving purposefully through his land, taking notes, building knowledge of a place. The same way you build knowledge of a person slowly and with full attention hit him somewhere he wasn't ready for. Stakes, he said when he reached her. I need to check the boundary stakes on the South Creek line. She read his face. Today. Now. She closed the notebook. I'm coming. They crossed the property at a walk that kept wanting to become a run, and Eli only let himself breathe fully when they reached the first boundary stake, and it was still there, iron solid, undisturbed. The second, the third, the fourth at the creek elbow. The fifth stake was gone, not pulled up violently, not knocked, just gone as though it had simply decided to be elsewhere. But the ground around the hole was disturbed in a way that soil doesn't disturb itself, packed down on one side, loosened on the other. Josie crouched beside the hole. She pressed her fingers into the ground. She looked up at Eli. Last night, she said, or very early this morning, the ground is still damp in the disruption zone. While I was at the county seat, Eli said. While you were at the county seat, she confirmed. She stood. Her face was calm, but her eyes were doing something more complicated. He had someone watching, and when you rode out this morning, they moved. I need to replace that stake and document the original position before Monday. Do you have the original survey plat with the measurements? At the house. Get it, she said. I'll stay here. Josie, I'll stay here, she repeated. If anyone comes near this section between now and when you're back, I want to see them. She looked at him with an expression that did not invite argument. Go. He went. He got the survey plat and a replacement stake and the iron mallet from the barn, and he was back in under 20 minutes because he moved fast and didn't stop once to think about anything other than the land and the woman standing on it. She hadn't moved. She was exactly where he'd left her, standing at the edge of the hole watching the tree line on the far side of the creek with still patient attention. The attention of someone who has learned that the thing you're looking for usually announces itself if you wait long enough. Clear, Eli said. Clear. He set the stake. He measured from the two nearest original markers using the plat, re-establishing the position precisely, and drove it in. Josie held the plat for him without being asked, keeping it steady, while he measured, calling out the numbers with calm precision. They worked in complete efficient tandem, the kind of coordination that usually takes years to build between two people. When the stake was set and the mallet down, Eli crouched and looked at the position. It's right, he said. I know, she said. She was looking at the line of the creek through the property, and then she said very quietly, he's not going to stop. No, Eli agreed. He's going to escalate. The gossip about me, the stake removal, those are testing moves. He's checking how you respond. She looked at Eli. How are you going to respond? Eli picked up the mallet. He looked at the creek, at the stake, at the land that had been his for 8 years of work and planning, and staying when staying was the harder choice. I'm going to be standing here on Monday, he said, when the county surveyor comes. And I'm going to have every document, every measurement, and every witness I need. He looked at her. And that boundary is going to be legally unassailable by the time Roy Decker wakes up Tuesday morning. Something moved in Josie's face, something warm and decided. Good, she said. The ladies' social was Friday evening, and Josie went. Eli offered to come. She told him not to. It'll be better if I go alone, she said. A man standing next to me changes what they'll say. I need to hear what they actually think. He understood the logic and didn't like it, but he let her go because she was right, and also because he was already learning that telling Josie what she could and couldn't do was approximately as effective as telling the creek which way to run. She came home 2 hours later and sat down across from him at the table without taking off her coat, which meant something had happened that she was still carrying. Tell me, he said. She folded her hands on the table. 3 women were friendly. Genuinely friendly, a Mrs. Patton and 2 sisters named Gail. They knew about the talk and made a point of letting me know they didn't give it weight. She paused. Helen Marsh spent the evening on the other side of the room and didn't speak to me once after the initial greeting. And Clara Decker was there. Eli went very still. Roy's wife. His wife, Josie confirmed. She's quiet. She sat near the window the whole evening. Most people didn't pay her much attention. Another pause. But she watched me. The whole evening. Carefully. And at the end, when everyone was putting on their coats, she came to me. Just for a moment. Very quietly. Eli waited. She said, Josie looked at the table. When she looked up, her eyes were something he hadn't seen before, not upset, but disturbed. Genuinely troubled. She said, be careful of what he has on paper. Roy never goes after something he doesn't already have a claim to on paper. The kitchen went completely quiet. Then she walked out, Josie said. Before I could say a word, Eli sat back in his chair. His mind was moving fast through the implications, and none of them were comfortable. He has a document, he said. Or he believes he does. Something that claims the boundary is where he wants it, not where it is. Something a county clerk might have to consider, Josie said, if it were presented alongside the survey. Peel is honest, she said. But if Roy puts a competing document into the county record before Monday, Peel is legally obligated to weigh it. Eli stood up. He walked to the window and stood there with his hand pressed against the frame. His mind was going through every document, every paper, every record he had, and what could possibly exist on Roy Decker's side that he hadn't foreseen. "The original surveyor's assistant," Eli said. "The one who works in Peel's office now." Josie stood up too. "If that man has access to the original survey records, he could alter the notes," Eli said. "Not the plat that's too visible, but the field notes, the margin measurements, something small enough to look like a clerical issue rather than fraud." They looked at each other across the table. "I need to call in a favor," Eli said. "I know a man worked with the Territorial Land Office before he retired. He knows what legitimate survey field notes look like and what altered ones look like. Can you reach him by tomorrow?" "If I ride tonight." Josie's face did something complicated. "Eli, it's 9 o'clock. I know what time it is. You'd be riding in the dark. I've done it before." "Done." She looked at him steadily. Then she said, "Take the bay. He's steadier at night than the roan." She walked past him to the kitchen and came back with his coat off the hook by the door and held it out. He took it. Their hands touched for the first time, actually touched. Not almost touched, not almost. His fingers closed around the coat's collar, and hers were right there, and neither of them moved for a full 2 seconds. "Come back safe," she said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't soft. It was the thing you say to someone whose safety has, without your full permission, become something that matters to you. Eli heard it exactly the way it was meant. "Lock the door," he said. "Both bolts." She nodded. He rode out into the dark, and behind him the lamplight in the window stayed on, because Josie Tanner was not the kind of woman who waited in the dark. She was the kind who kept the light burning steady and sure, like a fixed point you could navigate back toward no matter how far you'd gone. And Eli, riding hard through the Montana night with the stakes of everything he'd built pressing at his chest, found himself thinking about that light the whole way there. Walter Briggs lived 12 miles east of Bitterroot, in a house he'd built with his own hands 30 years ago, and hadn't changed much since, because Walter Briggs was a man who believed that things built right the first time didn't need improving. He was 63, retired from the Territorial Land Office after 22 years, and he had a dog named Cobb, who barked at everything and trusted no one, which Walter considered the dog's finest quality. Eli knocked on the door at 11:30, and Walter answered it with a lantern in one hand and a look on his face that said he was neither surprised nor pleased, but would hear the thing out regardless. "Tanner," he said, "it's late. I know. I need your eyes on something." Walter looked at him for a moment. Then he opened the door wider and let him in. Eli laid it out plainly, the survey filing the missing stake, Clara Decker's warning about a competing document, the assistant, who now worked in Peel's office, and had access to original field notes. Walter listened without interrupting, which was how Walter always listened, with the patience of a man who had spent 2 decades untangling other people's paperwork, and had learned that the most important details almost always came out somewhere in the middle, not at the start. When Eli finished, Walter set down his coffee cup and said, "The assistant's name is Carver, Ben Carver. You know him." "I trained him." Walter's voice was flat. "He was competent, careful, good instincts." A pause. "He also had debts when he left the land office, considerable ones. I always wondered how he settled them so quickly once he moved to Bitterroot. The implication sat between them like something with weight." "If Roy Decker paid Carver's debts," Eli said, "then Carver is Roy's man in Peel's office," Walter said. "Has been for however long, waiting for a use." He looked at Eli steadily. "And Roy's finally found one. Can altered field notes hold up against an original plate? Depends on who's reading them and what they're looking for." Walter stood and went to the shelf along the back wall, floor to ceiling, organized in a system that would have looked like chaos to anyone else, and was in fact meticulously ordered. He pulled a leather-bound folder from the third shelf. "Field notes from a survey in 1871. Same region, neighboring property. I kept copies of everything I ever worked on habit." He set it on the table. "If Carver altered your original field notes, he would have to adjust the margin bearings. And if he did that, the adjustments won't match the 1871 regional benchmarks, because those benchmarks are fixed, and Carver won't know to cross-reference them. Nobody taught him that part. I hadn't gotten to it before he left. Eli looked at the folder. You're saying you can prove the alteration. I'm saying that if there is an alteration, I can demonstrate that the adjusted bearings don't conform to established regional survey benchmarks, which invalidates them. Walter sat back down. That's not the same as proving Carver did it, but it makes the competing document legally unenforceable. Can you come Monday to the survey? I can come Monday. Walter picked up his coffee again. You should also know that Roy Decker came to see me 3 weeks ago. Eli went still. He wanted to know if I remembered the original Tanner survey, whether I had any copies of notes from that period. Walter's expression was unchanged, steady, and dry. I told him I had no idea what he was talking about, and that my memory wasn't what it used to be. He looked at Eli. My memory is excellent. Why didn't you come to me? Because you didn't come to me, Walter said simply. A man doesn't warn his neighbor about a wolf unless the neighbor has asked whether he's seen wolves. You hadn't asked. He set down the cup. Now you have. I'll be there Monday. Eli rode home faster than he'd ridden out and made it back before 2 a.m, and when he came through the door, the kitchen lamp was still burning, and Josie was asleep in the chair beside the table, with her head tilted back and his old wool blanket pulled across her lap. She'd waited up for him. She'd tried not to fall asleep, and she'd lost the argument with exhaustion, and she'd waited up anyway. Eli stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at her. Not the way he'd been careful not to look at her since she arrived with that deliberate avoidance that was its own kind of acknowledgement. He just looked. The way you look at something real. Something that has settled into a space in your life and made it unrecognizable in ways you're no longer certain you'd undo. He crossed the room quietly. He put another log on the fire so the room would stay warm through the rest of the night. He blew out the lamp. He stood there for a second in the dark, then said quietly, Josie. She woke immediately, not gradually the way people wake from deep sleep, but all at once the way people wake who have trained themselves to be ready. Eli. She sat up straight. You're back. Are you all right? I'm fine. Go to bed. She looked at him in the dark, reading whatever was readable in the outline of him. Did he help? Walter will be there Monday. He can prove any alteration in the field notes. She let out a breath. Good, she said, just that. Then she folded the blanket, set it on the table, and stood. She paused. Did you eat anything? Josie? It's a simple question. I'm not hungry. Go to sleep. She walked past him toward the stairs. At the bottom step, she stopped her hand on the rail, her back to him. Eli, she said. Yeah. A pause. I'm glad you're back. She went upstairs. Eli stood in the dark kitchen for a long time, listening to the fire, listening to the silence of the house. Not the hollow silence of a man alone, but the full weighted silence of a house that has 2 people in it and knows the difference. Tug. Saturday brought trouble faster than either of them had expected. Gus Platt rode in before breakfast, not to the front gate this time, but directly to the barn, which was a deliberate breach of courtesy, the kind that announces intent before a single word is spoken. Eli came out of the house and met him in the yard, and behind him he heard the front door open. Josie positioning herself on the porch with the quiet efficiency of someone taking a watch post. Platt, Eli said, you're on private property. Just delivering a message, Gus said. He had a folded paper in his hand. He held it out. From Mr. Decker. Eli took it. He unfolded it without looking away from Gus, then dropped his eyes to the page long enough to read it. It was a purchase offer, formalized on legal paper with Roy Decker's signature at the bottom and a number that was by any reasonable accounting a fair market price for the entire Tanner Ranch, not the creek strip. The whole property. He's offering to buy me out, Eli said. He's offering a good price, Gus said. A real good price. More than that land'll fetch from anyone else. He had the comfortable posture of someone delivering what he believes to be an irresistible thing. Mr. Decker says the offer is open until Sunday evening. Sunday evening, Eli repeated. Day before your survey. Gus smiled. It didn't reach anywhere that mattered. He thought you might want to consider your options before Monday. Eli folded the paper back along its creases. He held it out to Gus. Tell Roy I said no. Gus didn't take the paper. You sure you want to do that without even sleeping on it? I slept fine last night, Eli said. Take the paper. Gus finally took it slowly, studying Eli's face for something that would indicate uncertainty. He didn't find it. He glanced toward the porch toward Josie. New wife have an opinion. My wife and I are of the same mind, Eli said. You can tell Roy that too. Gus tucked the paper in his coat and turned his horse. He paused at the gate. Mr. Decker's a patient man, Tanner, but he doesn't like complications. Then he should stop creating them, Josie said clearly and calmly from the porch. Gus looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not quite respect, but the shadow of it. He rode out without another word. Eli walked back to the porch. Josie was watching the gate. He'll report back within the hour, she said. I know. Then Roy knows we're not taking the offer. And he knows we're not frightened. She turned, which means he'll move to the document before Monday. Probably tonight or tomorrow. Walter will be ready. There's one more thing, Josie said. She looked at him directly. Clara Decker. Eli waited. She warned me for a reason, Josie said. Women like Clara, quiet women in hard situations, they don't say things like that without calculation. She knew what she was risking if Roy found out she'd spoken to me. She paused. I think she's been watching what Roy does for a long time. And I think she's tired. What are you saying? I'm saying that if there is a fraudulent document, something Roy had prepared, Clara might know where it is. Or who prepared it. Josie's voice was careful, not excited, deliberate. She's not going to come to us. But if I went to her, Josie. Eli's voice came out sharper than he intended. If Roy finds out you went to his wife, he won't find out, she said. Not if I go today while Gus is reporting back and Roy is deciding his next move. He'll be at his own ranch occupied. She looked at him steadily. It's a window, a small one. It's dangerous. Eli. She said his name the way she'd been saying it for a week now, easy, direct, like it had always been hers to say. Every move we've made has had a risk. This one has the highest potential payoff. If Clara knows something solid, something we can bring to Peel alongside Walter's benchmark evidence, we don't just survive Monday. We end this. Eli looked at her. He looked at the gate where Gus had just ridden out. He looked at the land around the house. His land. The thing he'd built and stayed for and refused to give up. Even when giving up would have been the easier choice, by far. And he thought about what it meant that someone else was now standing in it beside him, protecting it with the same instinct he'd always protected it himself. Be back before dark, he said. She was already walking toward the barn to saddle the mare. Dertag. Clara Decker answered her own door, which told Josie that the house staff had been given the afternoon somewhere else. Another window, or Clara had made one. She was a slight woman, somewhere in her late 30s, with careful eyes and the particular stillness of someone who has learned to take up as little space as possible. She looked at Josie without surprise, which meant she'd been expecting this, or something like it. Mrs. Tanner, she said. Mrs. Decker. Josie kept her voice low and even. You warned me at the social. I think you had more to say. Clara looked past Josie at the empty road. Then she stepped back from the door and let her in. They stood in the front room, neither sitting. The conversation was not the kind that involved sitting. He has a letter, Clara said without preamble. Her voice was barely above a conversational volume, but perfectly clear. From the original surveyor's assistant, Carver, dated 18 months ago. It claims that when the survey was first done, the boundary stake placement on the creek elbow was recorded incorrectly due to a miscalculation. That the intended placement was 15 feet further into your property. She paused. The letter has been notarized. The notary is a man named Gibbs in Heron County. He's Roy's cousin's husband. A family notary. Josie said. Yes. Clara looked at her hands. Roy paid Carver's debts 2 years ago, all of them, in exchange for this letter to be delivered when needed. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I found the letter in his desk 8 months ago. I've known what it was for since then. Why are you telling me this? Josie asked. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. Clara was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was the voice of a woman who has made a decision after a very long time of not making any. Because I have watched my husband take things from people for 15 years, she said. Because I have been quiet for 15 years. And because, she paused, something very controlled moving behind her expression. Because you walked into that social alone knowing what people were saying about you, and you held your head exactly level the entire time. And I thought, that is a woman who is going to fight for what's hers. She looked at Josie directly. I wanted you to win. The room was very still. Is there anything else on the document? Josie said. Any detail that would help us prove it was fabricated? The date? Clara said. The letter is dated 18 months ago. But Carver didn't move to Bitterroot until 14 months ago. He wasn't in the county when that letter was supposedly written. Josie felt something align, clean and certain like a key in a lock. Can you sign a statement saying you saw the letter in Roy's possession? Josie asked. Clara's face went through something complicated. Fear. Then something stronger than fear. Yes, she said. If it means this ends. Josie came home with a written statement from Clara Decker, folded inside her coat, and Eli read it at the kitchen table while the fire cracked and the evening settled around them, and by the time he finished reading, his face had done something it rarely did. She signed this, he said. She did. She knows what this costs her. She knows. Josie sat across from him. She's been building herself up to it for 8 months. I think she needed someone to come to the door. Eli set the statement on the table. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Josie, looked at her the way he'd looked at the land and the stake and the ledger and all the things that mattered fully, and without the careful deflection he'd been practicing since the moment she stepped off the stagecoach. Josie, he said. Something in his voice. Not the even practical tone of the past 2 weeks. Something lower. Something that had stopped managing itself. Eli, I need to say something, he said. Let me say it before I think myself out of it. She waited. When I filled out that form, he said, I asked for someone I couldn't feel anything for. I was deliberate about it. I thought that was smart. I thought if I don't feel anything, I can't lose anything. I can't get back to that place. He looked at the table. What I didn't account for was a woman who was going to walk in here and run straight at every problem I had, and fix fence posts, and read ledgers, and call Roy Decker's bluff to his foreman's face, and ride to a dangerous woman's house on her own, because she saw the move and decided to make it. He looked up. I didn't account for you. Josie was very still across the table. I'm not good at this, he said. I spent 4 years being not good at this by design, which probably makes it worse. But He stopped. Tried again. I don't want to manage this. I don't want to keep treating this like a business arrangement I'm maintaining a safe distance from. He pressed his hands flat on the table. I want this to be real. I want us to be real. If you... Eli, she said. I know it's soon, he said quickly. I know we've known each other 3 weeks. I know... Eli. Her voice was quiet, certain. I came out here because I had nothing left in Ohio, and I needed a life I could build. That's what I told myself on the stagecoach. That's what I told myself the first 3 days. She paused. And then you drove fence posts with me at dawn, and believed me without proof, and rode 12 miles in the dark to protect something you built with your own hands, and I stopped telling myself that. The fire settled. The house was very quiet. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I haven't been planning to. Eli looked at her. Something in him that locked long-defended thing came loose. Not violently, not dramatically, just the way ice goes in early spring, quietly, steadily. because the conditions have finally changed and there is no longer any reason to hold. "All right," he said. His voice was rough around the edges. All right," she agreed. They sat there for a moment longer, both of them at the same table, in the same kitchen, in the house that was becoming something neither of them had written on any form. And the evening held them there steady and still in the particular quiet of two people who have finally stopped pretending they are alone. Sunday passed in focused, deliberate preparation. Eli rode to Walter Briggs with Clara's statement and the detail about the date discrepancy, and Walter, reading it, looked up with the expression of a man who has just been handed precisely the instrument he needed. "The date kills it," he said. "Carver wasn't in the county. The notarization is fraudulent on its face." He refolded the statement. "Monday, this is finished." Eli came home, and they ate supper, and went through the documentation, one final time the deed, the original plat, Walter's benchmark evidence, Clara's statement. Everything in order, everything clean and certain. At the end of it, Josie looked at the papers spread across the table and said, "Whatever happens tomorrow, we did this right." "We did," Eli said. "Together," she said. It wasn't soft when she said it. It was factual, the same tone she'd used on the fence line in the ledger columns checking the mare's leg. The tone of something real. "Together," he said. He meant it the way a man means a thing, when he stopped measuring the distance between what he intends and what he feels and found that the distance has closed, not gradually, not with drama, but with the quiet inevitability of two people who were always going to arrive at the same place if only they kept moving. Monday was coming. Roy Decker was not done. And Eli Tanner, for the first time in 4 years, was not facing it alone. Monday arrived, the way important days always do, without ceremony, without warning in the air. Just the ordinary sounds of a ranch morning and the particular weight of knowing that something was going to be decided before the day was out. Eli was dressed and at the table before 5. Josie came downstairs 15 minutes later, and neither of them said good morning, the way people do when the morning feels ordinary. She put coffee in front of him and sat down across from him, and they went through the documents one final time. Not because they needed to, but because doing it gave their hands something to hold while their minds ran through everything that could go wrong. "Walter will be there by 8, Eli said. "And Peel. I sent word yesterday. He'll have the survey team at the creek boundary by 9. Josie nodded. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Roy will be there too." "I expect so. He's going to try to present the Carver letter before Walter can establish the benchmark discrepancy," she said. "He'll want to get it into the record first, make it look like the competing document was filed in good faith before any challenge." "I know," Eli said. "Which is why Walter is going to speak first. I've already arranged it with Peel." Josie looked at him. "When did you arrange that?" "Yesterday when I rode to Walter. I stopped at Peel's office on the way back." He looked at her steadily. "I've been doing this a long time, Josie. I'm not always 12 steps behind." Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, but warmer than her usual composure. "I know you're not," she said. "I just worry." "So do I," he said. "That's how I know to plan." They rode out together at 7:30. The creek boundary on a Monday morning with a county surveyor, a retired land office examiner, a clerk, and the 2 neighboring landholders gathered around it looked almost absurdly ordinary, just men standing at a creek with papers and equipment, the way they had stood at 1,000 creeks across 1,000 properties over the years. But the air was tight in the particular way of a courtroom before a verdict, and everyone there knew it. Roy Decker arrived at 9:05 with Gus Platt and a man Eli didn't recognize. Thin, in a town coat, carrying a leather satchel, with the careful posture of someone transporting something he's been told is valuable. Roy looked at Walter Briggs, and something moved in his expression, quickly controlled. "Briggs," Roy said. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Clearly," Walter said. Roy's eyes went to Eli, then to Josie standing beside Eli with her arms at her sides and her face composed and her eyes taking in everything. Roy's gaze on Josie lasted one beat too long, assessing, recalibrating, trying to determine what she knew and how much it mattered. He found nothing readable. That Eli knew would unsettle him more than anything else could. Arthur Peel opened the proceedings with the brisk efficiency of a man who runs a clean office and intends this interaction to reflect it. He had the original deed and plat in hand. The surveyor, a county-appointed man named Hendricks, had his equipment set at the boundary markers. Walter Briggs stood to the side with his folder and the expression of a man who is very comfortable being the calmest person at any given gathering. "Before we begin," Roy said, "I need to enter a document into the county record." A letter from Ben Carver dated, "Mr. Decker," Peel said without looking up from his papers. "All documents will be entered after the primary survey testimony. That is the standard procedure." "I'm aware of the procedure, Arthur," Roy said. His voice was pleasant, professionally pleasant, the kind that has a floor, it doesn't go below. "I'm asking for a brief exception, given the relevance of the document to. The procedure exists to ensure that no competing document influences the survey outcome before the survey is complete," Peel said. And now he did look up, and his expression was that of a man who has heard the argument already and prepared the answer days in advance. "The procedure will be followed. Mr. Briggs, you may speak." Roy went very still. Walter Briggs opened his folder. He did not rush. He was the kind of man who understood that composure is its own form of authority. He laid out the regional benchmark data from the 1871 survey, explaining in clear and methodical language how the fixed territorial benchmarks worked, how they cross-referenced with every property survey in the valley, and how any deviation in a field note's margin bearings that contradicted those benchmarks indicated either a calculation error or a deliberate alteration. Then he laid out the Tanner survey's original bearings. Then he laid out the bearings that would result if the Carver letter's claimed correction were applied. The adjusted bearings, Walter said, place the corrected stake position in conflict with the 1871 regional benchmark by a margin of 11 degrees. That is not a field measurement error. Field errors run to 1 or 2 degrees at most. 11 degrees is not an accident. He closed the folder. The Carver letter describes a correction that is geometrically impossible to reconcile with the established territorial survey record. The man in the town coat. Roy's man, the one with the satchel, shifted his weight. Eli watched Roy's face. Roy's face was doing the work of staying neutral, and it was costing him. Furthermore, Walter said, Mr. Carver was not a resident of this county at the time the letter is dated. He relocated to Bitterroot 14 months ago. The letter is dated 18 months ago. He looked up at Peel. I have a signed statement from a credible witness confirming that the letter was in Mr. Decker's possession prior to any survey dispute and was prepared specifically for this purpose. Peel held out his hand. Walter gave him the statement. Peel read it. His expression didn't change because Arthur Peel had a professional relationship with his own expressions, but his posture changed the very slight straightening of a man who has just received the piece of information that resolves a question he'd been carrying. Roy said, I'd like to know who signed that statement. The statement will be entered into the county record, Peel said. You'll have access to it through the standard review process. I'd like to know now, Roy said, and his voice had dropped one register, the pleasant professionalism thinning out. Josie spoke. She'd been quiet through the entire proceeding, standing beside Eli, and her voice came into the air clean and clear and entirely without heat. It doesn't matter who signed it, Mr. Decker. What matters is whether it's true. Roy looked at her. And we both know it is, she said. The silence that followed had a particular quality, the quality of a room after a hand has been turned face up on the table and everyone present can see what it is. Roy's man with the satchel took a quiet half-step backward. Gus Platt was watching his employer with the expression of a man recalculating his own position. Roy Decker looked at Eli Tanner. He looked at the woman standing beside him. He looked at Walter Briggs. He looked at Arthur Peel. And for the first time in perhaps a very long time, Roy Decker looked like a man who had run his calculation and found the numbers coming up wrong. The survey will proceed, Peel said, using the original plat coordinates. The Carver document will not be entered into the county record pending a formal review of its authenticity. He looked at Roy directly. Mr. Decker, you are welcome to engage legal counsel if you wish to challenge that decision. The process for doing so is in the county code. He turned to Hendricks. Mr. Hendricks, proceed. It took 40 minutes. The stakes were measured. The coordinates confirmed the record written and signed. When it was done, Arthur Peel signed it himself at the bottom and handed Eli a copy with the county seal. Eli held that paper in his hands and looked at it for a moment. 8 years of work, 4 years alone, 3 weeks of something new and unplanned and increasingly impossible to keep calling an arrangement. All of it protected, documented, sealed. Tanner. Roy's voice came from behind him. Controlled again. The professional pleasantness restored. We're going to be neighbors for a long time. Eli turned. We are, he said. No hard feelings, Roy said. Eli looked at him steadily. Roy, he said, you pulled a boundary stake on illegal property. You paid a man to falsify a document. You used a woman in this town to spread deliberate lies about my wife. He kept his voice level. Even. Those aren't things I can have no feelings about. But I'll tell you what I will do. I'll let the legal process handle what it handles. And I'll keep my side of the boundary line, and I'll expect you to keep yours. A pause. That's the most either of us is going to get from today. Roy held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once, a single precise nod. The kind a man gives when he's accepting a result he didn't want, without giving up the pretense of dignity. He turned, and Gus followed him, and the man with the satchel followed Gus, and they walked to their horses and rode north. Walter came and stood beside Eli. He looked at the road where Roy had gone. He'll be careful for a while, Walter said. Then he'll try something else. Different approach, different angle. That's how men like that work. I know, Eli said. You'll need to keep the documentation current. Check the boundary quarterly. We will, Eli said. He heard himself say it, the we without hesitation, without the fraction of a pause that would have been there 3 weeks ago. Walter heard it too. He glanced at Josie, and something in the old man's dry expression warmed by 1 degree. Good wife, Walter said quietly to Eli. Yeah, Eli said. She is. They rode home side by side, and the morning had turned full and bright, and neither of them spoke for a long time, which was its own kind of conversation between two people who have learned each other's silences well enough to hear what's in them. It was Josie who spoke first. Clara, she said, I know. Eli had been thinking about it since they left the creek. She signed that statement. Roy is going to know. He might already know. She'll need somewhere to go, Eli said. She can't stay at the Decker Ranch after this. Josie turned to look at him from the saddle. He could feel her looking at him. You're thinking about where to send her, she said. I know a woman in Helena, respectable, runs a boarding house. Discreet. He glanced over. I was going to ask if you thought Clara would go. Josie was quiet for a moment. I think she's been waiting for someone to open the door, she said. The same way she was waiting for someone to knock on hers. I'll ride to the Decker place this afternoon. Talk to her directly. I'll come with you. Josie. Roy will be home, she said. Having a woman present changes the nature of the visit, makes it less confrontational on the surface, harder for him to turn into an altercation. She looked at him. I'll come with you, he nodded. All right. They got back to the ranch and ate a quick meal and rode back out, and when they knocked on the Decker door that afternoon, it was Clara herself who answered, and she looked at both of them standing there, and something in her face, that careful, long-held stillness, finally cracked just at the edges, like frost on glass when the temperature shifts. He's not here, she said. He rode to town. We came to see you, Josie said. May we come in? Clara Decker left the Decker Ranch on Wednesday morning with 2 bags and a letter of introduction to the boarding house in Helena. She left before Roy came home from wherever he'd been the night before, and she left without a note, because she had decided that she had spent 15 years explaining herself to a man who was not listening, and she saw no reason to spend the 15 minutes of her departure the same way. Josie had helped her pack on Tuesday evening, while Eli waited outside with the horses. It was not something either of them discussed in terms of what it was, a woman helping another woman take the first step out of something she'd been in too long, but it was understood between them completely. When Clara's wagon was loaded and the team was ready, Clara looked at Josie and said, "Thank you." "You did this yourself," Josie said. "You made the decision. You signed the statement. You opened the door when I knocked." She held Clara's gaze. "I just knocked." Clara nodded. She climbed up to the seat and gathered the reins. She paused. "He's not going to be what he was before, you know. Roy?" She looked at Josie seriously. "Losing this the way he lost it, he'll be smaller after this. Men like him get small when they lose. And small men are meaner than large ones." "We'll watch for it," Josie said. "Good." Clara looked across at Eli, who had come to stand beside Josie. "You built something real," she said to him. "Both of you." She looked at the two of them together, standing the way they stood now, neither of them performing the ease of it, just naturally, close, naturally aligned, as though the configuration were simply the correct one. "Take care of it." She drove out and they watched until the wagon was gone from sight, and then they stood there for a moment in the quiet. "She's going to be all right," Josie said, not a question. "Yes," Eli said. "She is." The weeks after that had a different quality from the weeks before. Not easier necessarily. Running a ranch in Bitterroot Valley was never easy, and was not going to become easy, simply because the legal threat had been neutralized. There was still fence to run, and cattle to manage, and the east pasture rotation to implement, and all the daily labor that doesn't pause for any personal development, emotional or otherwise, but different. The way a room is different when you finally move the furniture to where it actually should have been all along, a little surprising, and then immediately, obviously right. Eli noticed the changes in himself more than he'd expected to. The way he'd stopped eating standing at the counter. The way he'd started talking through ranch decisions out loud rather than chewing on them alone for days. The way he woke up in the morning without the particular blankness that had been for 4 years his entire emotional climate. That careful, maintained numbness that had kept him functional and hollow in equal measure. He noticed other things, too. The way Josie laughed, which didn't happen constantly. But when it happened, it was real, not decorative. The laugh of a person genuinely caught off guard by something. The way she argued with him, which she did freely and without self-consciousness, and which he had discovered to his own considerable surprise, he didn't mind at all. The way she touched the land, his land, their land, with the particular attention of someone investing in a future, not just passing through it. 3 weeks after the survey, they were at the kitchen table after supper, when Eli said without planning to, "I was engaged before." Josie looked up from the stock report she was reading. "Her name was Margaret," he said. "We were together 2 years. I built this ranch for us, or started to." He looked at the table. "She left 2 months before the wedding, went back east. She'd met someone else," she said. "Someone from a better situation." He paused. What she meant was, she'd realized this. He gestured at the general. Everything wasn't the life she wanted. She didn't tell me until she was already leaving. Josie set down the report. "I'm not telling you that to explain myself," Eli said. You should know it. Since we're..." He stopped. "Since we're real," Josie said quietly. "Yeah," he said. "Since we're real." She was quiet for a moment. "I know what it does to a person," she said. "When someone you trusted decides you're not worth the thing they promised." She looked at him. "It makes you very careful about what you promise next time." "It made me try not to promise anything," he said. "I know." She said it without judgment. "And then you ordered a plain, quiet wife who wouldn't ask you for anything." A beat. "How's that working out?" Despite himself. Despite everything, Eli laughed. It came out rough and real, the laugh of a man who hasn't used that particular muscle in a long time and finds it still works. Josie's expression opened up into a smile, a full one, not the almost smiles she rationed so carefully, and it was the most devastating thing Eli Tanner had ever seen in his entire life, and he was done pretending otherwise. "Josie," he said. "Eli. I want to say something properly. Let me say it properly." She folded her hands on the table and waited, and her expression was careful and open and entirely herself. "I know this started as a transaction," he said. "I know I put in a request for someone I could keep at arm's length, and you arrived and made that impossible inside the first 3 days." He stopped, tried again. "You are the most capable, clear-eyed, infuriating, honest person I have ever shared a fence post with. You protected this ranch like it was already yours. You protected me. You went to Clara Decker's door, and you stayed up until midnight waiting for me to come home safe, and you never once asked me to notice those things." He looked at her steadily. "I noticed. I notice everything you do. I've been noticing from the first day." Josie's eyes were very bright. She wasn't crying. She was simply fully present the way she was always fully present, taking in what was real. "I love you," Eli said. "I didn't go looking for it. I specifically tried to prevent it. But I love you, and this ranch is yours as much as it's mine, and I want the rest of my life to be whatever you and I build it into." He paused. "That's what I want to say properly." The kitchen was very still. Josie looked at him for a long moment. And then she said, "I loved you before the fence posts." She said it simply the way she said all true things. "I think I loved you when you shook my hand on Main Street and looked embarrassed about what you'd said. Because a man who feels embarrassed about hurting someone is a man worth staying for." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. "This has been mine for weeks, Eli. The ranch, the ledger, the kitchen." She met his eyes. "You." He turned his hand over and held hers. They stayed like that at the table that had held so many of their conversations, arguments, and strategies, and quietly shared suppers and late nights with ledgers and documents and all the ordinary and extraordinary business of two lives becoming one. And the house was solid around them, and the land was outside them, and everything they had fought for together was still standing. Roy Decker, as Clara had predicted, became smaller after that. He didn't approach the boundary again. The Carver letter was quietly withdrawn from any potential county proceeding when Peel indicated his office would be initiating its own inquiry into the document's authenticity. Ben Carver requested a transfer to a different county office within the month. The gossip Helen Marsh had been running dried up with the particular speed of gossip that has stopped being interesting, which is to say, the moment people understood there was nothing scandalous to sustain. It just a man and a woman building something solid in Bitterroot Valley, which was not scandalous at all. Mrs. Patton and the Gale sisters came out to the ranch in October with a pie and a genuine desire to know Josie without an agenda, and Josie let them in, and the afternoon was the first of many. The ranch's east pasture rotation produced exactly what the recalculated numbers had promised. The gray mare's leg healed clean. The north fence held through winter without a single post going down. And on a Thursday evening in November, when the work was done and the fire was going and the ledger showed a year that had come in better than the 3 before it, Josie said from across the room where she was putting the stock report on the shelf, "I wrote to my sister in Ohio." Eli looked up. "You have a sister. 3 of them. I told you my father had 4 daughters." She turned around. "I told the youngest one that if she ever needed a place to land, Bitterroot Valley was not the worst option available." "You told her to come here?" "I told her it was an option." Josie tilted her head. "Is that all right?" Eli looked at his wife. His actual, real, entirely impossible to have anticipated wife, standing in the lamplight of the kitchen he'd once eaten in alone every single night for 4 years. He thought about the form he'd filled out on a Tuesday in March with careful, deliberate words designed to prevent exactly this. He thought about the stagecoach rolling in, and the way the air had changed, and "She is not what I ordered," said out loud on Main Street, and her shaking his hand and saying, "I heard what you just said," without flinching. He thought about fence posts and ledger columns, and a midnight ride through Montana, and a boundary stake replaced in solid ground, and a signed statement that ended a 15-year pattern of a man taking what wasn't his. He thought about, "I love you," said at a kitchen table, and you said back, clear and certain, the way Josie said all true things. "Tell her," Eli said, "that the valley's a good place to build something, if she's willing to work for it." Josie smiled, the full one, the real one. "I'll tell her exactly that." Outside, the Montana night held the ranch in its cold, familiar dark. Inside, the lamp burned steady, the fire ran warm, and Eli Tanner sat in his own kitchen and understood with the particular certainty of a man who has stopped fighting something true, that the best thing that had ever happened to him had stepped off a stagecoach on a dusty April afternoon in answer to a request he had not known how to make, and that she had built a home here the way she built everything, with clear eyes, capable hands, and a certainty that never once asked his permission to take hold. They had come together as strangers and stayed as something no form or agency could have planned or predicted or adequately named, and what they had built between them on that land in that house, through those weeks of fire and work and fear and honesty, was exactly what love looks like when it is chosen, fought for, and refused to be anything less than real.